This is Kreskin. Do I have to mention the amazing Kreskin? I don't think so, but I did it anyway. There's one way of getting out some publicity. Listen, folks, there's a reason I'm wearing this, and it's something I've wanted to address for a couple of years now. I foresaw this coming a year ago, and it's complicated things immensely. The wearing of masks, which of course we should be doing because of the protection. As far as how much longer this is to take place, I'm not going to listen to His Holiness Father Fucci and so forth, because I don't think we should be wearing a mask for 20 more years or what have you. But at the same time, seriously, what has happened, and there's no question about this, is that this is part of the reason for the breakdown of real communications between people. Not that we shouldn't be wearing this as a protection at the time being, but we are losing something. We're losing the full communication, because when we speak to each other, we not only hear what someone says, we hear the words, not as much as we used to, but we still hear the words, and we glance and see some of the expressions and what have you, which are very, very important, except that many of these expressions are lost when you're holding back on something, whether it's upsetting or stressful or exciting. Sometimes your tongue gets caught behind the lower part of your facial skin, almost to hold back on something. There's something that you want to talk about that you can't quite bring yourself to speak of. You can see a tightness in the muscles when a person is holding back on being upset, crying, or what have you. They may rub one of their eyes, even though there's no tears there. So there's a larger picture to communication instead of simply reading what someone says and what have you. The problem, oh, by the way, in all credit, don't you know, there are some special groups that deal with non-verbal communication. Understand this. Don't think that if you become, quote, authority on nonverbal communications, you now have the postscript, the translation. So whenever the right eye twitches, it means this. When the left eye twitches, it means this. If the right eye twitches and your left forefinger twitches at the same time, you're saying this. No, that kind of crap doesn't work. Don't let yourself become influenced by it. But there are interesting studies being made some time ago when the tragedy and the photos were finally released by the United States government around the entire scene where Walter Cronkite reported on CBS News the assassination of John F. Kennedy. It was an interesting study to see Cronkite before he finally came out and said what he was looking at and had seen a minute or so earlier, and that was that the President of the United States had been murdered. You see it in certain responses, twitching with the eye, a point where he almost holds back crying and what have you. Now, that doesn't mean that if you see another person going through the same thing, that they're holding back, announcing the assassination of someone. This is an understanding of how his makeup, this brilliant, brilliant communicator, prepared himself and tried to grapple with the shock and the horror of what he saw, and that was that the President of the United States had been murdered. The situation now is we need to communicate more effectively. And by the way, I hope that no one does a special piece necessarily on my handshake, because not that it would require many, many pages to understand how and why I've shaken my hand with folks like that since in my teens. And I understand someone wants to write a book on it, but it would only be 2 pages long. Seriously, that's a whole pattern of mine because of my energy, my enthusiasm, and what have you. But at the same time, I really feel that the key, the genuine key, is our using all our resources in spite of part of them being blocked off by this. young people are not getting the messages that they used to get as fully because one area of the communication has literally been shut off. And that's a very, very serious scenario to even consider at this time. The, the situation now is that the real key, and there's another key that's been ignored by this study of nonverbal communication. And that real key, and by the way, you might bring up the polygraph test. Let me bring it up. And let me tell you exactly how I feel about it and how many, many of the authorities in communication feel. And this has nothing to do with my ability to read thoughts. The polygraph test has been used for many, many decades in criminal investigations and what have you. But I can bring you close to an experience because I went through an experience. A couple of years ago, I was called in on a robbery case in the area of Essex County, New Jersey. A tremendous amount of jewelry had disappeared from a home in which these two lovely people resided in. They were on in years, and jewelry was gone. When I arrived and I met the police, two of them said, Kreskin, we really don't know why you're here because we know who stole the jewelry. And I said, how do you know? They said, we gave this person a polygraph test and he failed. He totally failed. And they told me who the person was. And I simply said to them, you're absolutely wrong. He did not steal the jewelry. And they asked me how I know. No, I did not test him. I did not interview him. I said, I've known this person for some 30, 40, 50 years. I know him very closely. He's a professional person, and he did not steal the jewelry. Well, we got in a mild argument, the three of us, because they saw the results. I walked into a room in which the people who knew the family and associated with the family and were part of the family were gathered. They did not know exactly why I was there. They knew me. They knew who I was, had seen me perform and what have you, and were enthusiastic, but I wasn't there to do a show. I ended up conversing whenever I could with different individuals, more or less slightly privately, where there were not a lot of people all talking to the same person that I was talking to. And in different ways, I brought up the loss of the jewelry and what have you. When the evening got late and I was leaving, the police were still outside waiting. And I said, I can't judge because I did not work with these people. I didn't really directly question them. I brought up the jewelry. I don't believe anyone in there stole that jewelry. And they got irritated because they said, of course not. We know who stole the jewelry. I left in anger, and months went by, a few years went by. The case was never solved at that point, and the elderly couple had gotten on in years, and I believe one of it passed on, I'm not sure which, but senility had set in, memories had gone and what have you. And finally, when they were both gone, the family decided to put the house up for sale. My person that I knew that I believed was innocent had since passed away. But bear in mind, there are enough people who knew the results of the polygraph test that potential guilt hung over him those last years of his life. Oh, by the way, he had passed away, and I got a call from the family. They said, Kreskin, you were right about Dr. So-and-so being innocent. I said, of course I was right. They said, we believed you, but there were others that did not, including the police. It turns out that they're putting the house up for sale. On the third floor, they opened a cabinet, and there at the top was all the jewelry. Evidently, the couple, as their memories broke down and senility became more complex, completely forgot that that's where they put the stolen jewelry, which was never stolen. Oh, by the way, if all these signs and clues and mannerisms can detect, why has the polygraph been banned and is not allowed in most court cases in the United States? I like to think that I am part of that reason. But know this, there is no machinery around that can tell whether a person is telling the truth or not. What you have to do, the day has not arrived that we are able to take this off under all conditions. So what you need to do is not remember whether there's a twitch here, a twitch here, a twitch here, a twitch here. But when you communicate, and you owe it to your kids to do this as well, try to make it as full communication as possible. Listen to what the other person is saying. Hear what they're saying. Not that you're going to tell by the sound of the voice whether they're lying or not lying. But as I've taught in many seminars around the country, including for private companies, the tone and the change of tone of a voice can be very, very indicative. I can tell with a long distance call, and people who work with me know this, picking up the phone, I can tell within 10 seconds whether that person is calling because of a crisis, a confusion, a dilemma, or just to say hello because of cheerfulness. We need to hear each other. And when we hear each other, we don't really do it with the eyes, we do it with the ears and our entire self in the movement between us. That is where things stand right at this point. Listen, interrelate, and make sure with those that you're close to, even if you don't see them all the time, you pick up the damn phone and communicate. To be continued.